This story is set in Dublin in 1941 during the war. And this is a time when the cinema played a great part in many people's lives, all between the 20s and 30s and 40s, and then started to fizzle out with the advent of television. And many people, my aunts included, modelled themselves on the film stars. Um, and that's what gave me the idea of this story. Uh, Muriel has modelled herself on Scarlette O'Hara in the film Gone with the Wind. Now that was a classic film, so classic with Vivian Leigh as Scarlett that there was never another version of it made. I don't think anyone could play Scarlett as Vivian Leigh did. Anyway, here is the story, and it's called, of course, What Would Scarlette O'Hara Do? Oh, not glasses. Whoops. The girl passing the office window wearing a full-blooded red dress caught Muriel's attention. That dress was exactly the colour of one worn by Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. The best film, the newspapers had proclaimed a couple of years previously. Muriel glanced at the clock. Gosh, it was 1:15. What an exhausting morning it had been. It was really too bad, she complained under her breath. This was the third Saturday in a row her boss had kept her late, but if she was lucky and caught a tram immediately, she'd be home by 2 and she and Bob could set open their bags and be at the Burns around 6. Of course, the train would be quicker, but it was bound to be packed because of the bank holiday weekend. She'd been over the moon since Becky Burns said her brother Frank was coming home and asked herself and Bob to spend the weekend at the farm. Muriel had met Frank Byrne last year and was love at first sight. Frank was a spitting image of Red Butler in Gone with the Wind. Scarlett was her idol. She even copied Scarlett O'Hara's hairdo by putting hers in a chignon. What other woman could face up to such dreadful calamities and emerge victorious? Besides which, she married Red Butler too. Muriel hoped she was just as plucky and as glamorous as Scarlett O'Hara. It was just 1:30 by the time the tram put to town, in spite of the fact there was little traffic on the road now that the use of private cars had been banned for the duration of the war. And just after she'd got her driving license too. Rotten bad luck. She hated seeing the family Ford in the carriage with his tires removed and up in blocks. If only this war would end and Frank home for good, she sighed wistfully. But there was no sign of that. The newspapers were full of the German advance through Russia, and there'd been another dreadful blitz in London. How did they stick it there? Would Ireland be dragged into this war too? No, she wasn't going to think about that now. It was too depressing. No, Frank was home and she'd be seeing him tonight. She was glad now she'd plunged out on the new yellow frock. Her mother would have a fit if she knew it cost 19 shillings. But yellow was exactly the colour of the dress Scarlett O'Hara wore to the Wilkes party. Would Frank have changed, she wondered, frowning. He hadn't answered any of her letters, not a single one. But then the post was bound to be higgledy-piggledy in poor war-torn England, she decided with a shrug. God be praised that nothing had happened to him, and thank God that they had met. It'd been pure chance she had spent her holidays in Wicklow last year instead of going to Laytown. She and Bob went to the Burns farmhouse because Bob had met Becky Byrne at a dance, and they'd been going steady ever since. Muriel adored the farmhouse nestled in a glorious, lush green valley. Getting there was lovely too. The first time they had taken the steam train, which puffed up from Wooden Bridge through tall pine trees and banks of yellow gorse, undulating mountains in the distance. So unlike Laytown with its flat beach and equally flat sea. Then riding in a pony and trap from the village and up the Boreen with grass growing in the middle, over a little bridge with ferns peeping through the stonework and turf-coloured waters gurgling underneath, and up until they reached the long, low, whitewashed farmhouse. It was like something out of a film. It was great eating white bread again, smothered with salty homebred butter and these boiled milky eggs were sheer bliss. Memory of the taste made her mouth water. The evenings were great too, storytelling or playing cards in the pinkish light from the oil lamp, and going to bed with a candle in a tin holder, sorry. Once inside, the smell of the melted wax scented the room long after the candle was extinguished. Frank seemed to avoid her on her first visit to the farm, though at times she did catch him stealing a glance in her direction. All that changed when he saw her stroking the chestnut mare. "Do you ride?" His accent was soft County Wicklow. "No," she had replied. "I've never been on a horse in my life. Would you like to try?" "I'd be too frightened that fall off," she replied with a nervous laugh. "You won't," he had said confidently. "I'll see to that." She had smiled bravely as he led the chestnut mare out of the barn, and she hadn't fallen off. Frank never left Muriel out of his sight after that, and by the end of the weekend he told her he was in love with her. She was bitterly disappointed when she learned he was going to England. "There's nothing doing around here. What with the war," he said. "The war?" Muriel's heart fluttered at visions of Rhett Butler bravely leading a brigade of soldiers against the advancing Yankees flashed through her mind. "You're joining the army," she added breathlessly. "No," he said, smiling. "That's far too dangerous. I have a safe job as a supervisor of the railway yard in Plymouth." Her disappointment was brief. Silly her, she chided herself. Rhett Butler didn't join the army either. Instead, he worked behind the lines and did more good than 100 soldiers. "Useful work," she said with a wise nod of the head. Suddenly her romantic visions evaporated into thin air. "What about us?" "I'll write you every week." "You will?" Her hopes rose again. "You promise?" His reply was a brilliant Rhett Butler smile and a lingering kiss. To think that a year had passed, and in a few hours she was seeing her beloved once more. Muriel hurriedly stepped off the tram and ran across the road, and after a quick lunch, she and Bob set off on their bikes for Wicklow. That night, Muriel wept into her pillow. Frank had changed, and the change wasn't just his swagger and pencil-thin moustache. He gave all the appearance of going out of his way to ignore her. Embarrassed, she fervently prayed that her letters, overflowing with declarations of love, hadn't reached him. Next morning she woke to the sound of a cockerel crowing in the yard below her window. For an instant she didn't know where she was. Then with a jolt she remembered the previous evening. How was she going to face him? She couldn't pretend to be ill and spend the day in bed. Besides, the parents were giving a party for him that evening. What would she do? What would Scarlette O'Hara do? Scarlette O'Hara would pull herself together, wash her hair, and wear her yellow frock. And now I'll read the next extract. Another next time. Okay? Bye.